I moved into my current house around a year ago after having a falling out with my previous roommates. It's a tiny house, built probably around 1922, and you can tell it's had little renovation since then. A lot of it needs work, but it's really cozy. My fiancé and I have been here for close to a year now. Since moving in, we've experienced paranormal activity that resembles something of a cat, which is hilarious to us. And we are not alone in this. We've actually had more than a few people confirm to us that they've either seen said cat or have felt the presence of one. Going back to the first few experiences we had, it would just be seeing a little black bull dart around the corners or even up the stairs. One day, my fiancé and I are sitting on the couch watching TV. From my living room, the dining room is to the right if you're sitting on the couch, and you can clearly see into it. So we're chilling after a long day of deep cleaning the house, and there was a paper towel roll just sitting in the middle of the table, standing straight up. As we're watching TV, the roll just flies off the table. Well, not flies, more like just fell, which was weird because it was directly in the middle of the table and nowhere even close to the edge, so it was more like batted off. I get up, pick it up, and put it back to where it was, and go back to what I was doing. I don't think anything of it. Some 10 minutes later, it happens again. So now I'm wondering what's happened. I'm thinking, was it wind? So I start crossing off things it could have been. It's the dead of summer, so was the window unit AC on? Nope. Ceiling fan? Nope. Nothing. There was no reason for it to be falling on the floor. Regardless, I shrug it off as just maybe it was some weird gravity phenomenon, or maybe the simulation of life is glitching. Later that week, we have a friend over. He's never really been over, and we never told him about the experiences my fiancé and I had. As soon as he walks in the door, he kind of does this like weird sidestep or step over maneuver. So I ask, what was that? And he goes, I thought I was going to step on an animal for some reason. And of course, there was nothing there. Couple hours later, my fiancé and I and our friend are eating dinner at the table, and an empty grocery bag in the kitchen falls from the bag of bags and just kind of sits there for a minute, deflated. Then it just opens like something crawled into it, and the top starts batting around unnaturally, like it's being played with. We all hear this and watch it happen for a few seconds, and then the bag returns to its deflated state, and we were all like, what was that about? Because again, didn't look like wind. Wind would have made the bag move around the kitchen more. So we now tell him about our previous experience, and we all come to the conclusion that it's most likely a cat. So we settle on the most cliche name ever. We call it Catspur. I spent a few minutes making fun of the name and ridiculing its antics. And later that night, around 4 a.m.-ish, I wake up to the sound of something move on my bedside table. I brush it off as just sleep delirium and try to go back to sleep. Then I just feel the gentlest whack on my head, like a paw swatting me. Then I hear something jump on the floor and skitter down the stairs. This time, I jump up, turn on the light, and investigate. Nothing. Not a single animal in the house. I know for sure it wasn't a mouse or anything. I exclaim, "Alright, you win. You can stay." Another time we had a few friends over, and someone who we didn't know, who had shown up with another friend, asks my fiancé, "Hey, can I meet your cat?" And of course we tell her the whole shebang, and she goes, "Huh, I thought you guys had a cat. I saw it run up the stairs." And we're just kind of like, yeah, it does that. So now we just have a ghost cat, and whenever I give it a lot of crap for being an ass, one of our decorative fake cactuses will just fall from one of the shelves for no reason. But on good days, we'll feel the gentle brush up against our legs when we're sitting on the couch, and an overall sense of comfort from the house. We've never felt anything malicious or had any other bad experiences living there, just the cat. According to our landlady, the previous tenant had a lot of pets. It's entirely possible one of them passed and their soul just stuck around. I'm not complaining, but next time it swats my head in my sleep, I'm getting the ghost cat spray bottle. It was probably only after my close call that my mind really started to run away with what could have happened were it not for my dog. I'm a 26-year-old female and live with my fiancé, my 2 cats, and my dog, Rowan. Our house is literally less than a minute away from a huge farmer's field that is frequented by many dog walkers at all times of the day. Me and my significant other take turns walking Rowan around the field throughout the day. It was around 7:30 p.m. and it was still really bright and sunny. Rowan was letting me know it was time to go for a walk. So while my partner was tinkering in the garage, I grabbed his lead and headed to the field. Let me quickly tell you about Rowan. He's a 2-year-old Rottweiler who's very loving and playful, if a little daft. He would not hurt a fly, not a bad bone in his body. He's also extremely well trained. We made sure to put the effort in, as he's a big dog breed with a bad rep, so wanted to make a point of not feeding stereotypes. I'm very much of the opinion that there are no bad dogs, just bad owners. Unfortunately, we've had some run-ins with some not so good owners, so Rowan gets a little nervous while meeting new dogs and people, but we're working on it. Anyway, back to the story. We're walking around the farmer's field. Rowan is sniffing and peeing on every blade of grass in sight. I always keep an eye out for other walkers anyway, due to Rowan being a little nervous, and I clocked a guy on his own, walking down the path towards me, fairly far away. At first, I thought nothing of it, as plenty of people walked this route without dogs. We were just coming out of lockdown in the UK. As the guy got closer, I noticed he was in a full tracksuit with a hood up, which was odd, as it was like 23 degrees, so shorts and t-shirt weather. He then took a small path off the field, leading through some bushes. It was a public-made shortcut, rather than the official public path, but it was well enough used, so I kept walking, thinking nothing of it. At about 15 meters away from the path he took, Rowan shot back to my side, immediately dropping the mouthful of dirt he'd been pretending not to eat. He's not the smartest. I pet him, and noticed he was standing super alert, staring at the path entrance. When I looked up, I caught a glimpse of the man peeking around the edge of the bushes that concealed the entrance. I stopped dead in my tracks, and Rowan's fur was stood on end as he positioned himself in front of me. It took me a second to realize that this man had been watching and waiting in the bushes for me to approach. My current route would have meant that I'd be walking right by the path's opening. My stomach dropped as I realized we were the only ones around on that field. I had this weird moment where I was almost trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. But then, the guy whistled. Not a wolf whistle, but as if to try to get my dog to come to him. Rowan was having none of it though, and I definitely took that as my cue to trust my stranger danger instincts. I immediately turned and sped walked back the way I came, simultaneously pulling my phone out and dialing my partner's number. I ended up having to clip on Rowan's lead to get him to walk with me, but he was not taking his eyes away from the path. He was even growling a little, which was so out of character and put me on edge even more. I glanced back, and the man had edged slightly out of the bushes, watching me walk away. My partner answered the phone after a few rings. I was only halfway through stammering out the story, and he was already sprinting up the field to me, telling me to stay on the phone, but keep an eye on the man. The man in the tracksuit now fully came out of the bushes and just stood, staring at me walking away. I dared a quick look away from him, towards the entrance to the field, to see my fiancée jogging towards me. He was relieved I was okay, but was immediately pointing and shouting, "Is this him?" Clearly furious at what this man might have had in mind had Rowan not picked up on him hiding in the bushes. I eventually convinced my fiancée not to confront him, as he was still stood staring, almost taunting us. You never know what people might be capable of or have concealed. We came off the field and took Rowan on a different walk, which he was more than happy about. I've never been so proud of Rowan for stepping up and protecting me. Safe to say, he got plenty of treats and fussing when we got home. So creepy man in the bushes, let's not meet. I'm not a spiritual person, nor do I believe in the paranormal, but 3 weeks ago, my cat died in my arms. Our bond was remarkable. I found him as a kitten. He was crossing a dangerous country road, so I stopped, opened my door, and he just jumped into my lap and curled up there. I was his. I'm an animal lover, and I've had special pets, but Solomon was like family to me. We even had our own special language. The week he died, he went missing on a Monday. I knew something bad had happened because he always came to me when I called him. I searched every square inch of my house, the woods, and land around the house, and each neighbor's properties for days. I even arranged to bring in search dogs. I'm telling you, if he was out there, I would have found him. I was devastated. Then Wednesday came around. By this time, most of the friends and family helping me search were exhausted and losing hope. I can't lie, I was too. At dusk, I prepared to turn in. My body ached and my spirit was broken, but I was just so damn restless. So, setting out solo for the first time, I leashed up my dog and decided to walk the property one last time. And that's when he found me. I was losing light when I spotted him out of the corner of my eye, sitting on the bank opposite the creek, a place I had already searched a dozen times. I called to him, and he looked towards me, almost as if he was searching my face to make sure it was really me before responding, and then literally bolted towards the house. Something was strange about this interaction, but we'll come back to that at the end. So I ran back up to the house, went down to the spot where I had seen him, and searched all around the woods with the light I had left. The entire time though, I felt pulled towards the cellar, another place I had also searched many times. And in the cellar he was. I knew as soon as I started down the steps. He answered my calls this time, the way he always has, but he was not right. He couldn't move. It turns out, he threw a saddle thrombus, a massive blood clot, cutting off all circulation to his legs and tail. Solomon couldn't walk, let alone move or sprint across acres to make it from his spot by the bank to the cellar in just a few minutes between these two encounters. He purred from the moment I picked him up until the very second he threw major clots to his lungs and brain 3 hours later. He died in my arms. My Solomon found me in the beginning, and he found me again at the very end. I can't explain what I saw or how it happened. When I spotted him by the creek, I found it almost impossible to focus on his face, almost as if I was looking at a poor quality recording of him. And more significantly, his eyes were completely black, not cloudy, his most distinguishing feature. Even the vet agrees that there was no way that it would have been physically possible for him to have run from the spot I saw him. I don't understand what this experience was, but I'm starting to believe that he found a way to come back to me as the end was nearing. I'll never forget this moment. Miss you, Solomon. Although it doesn't seem like it, this happened quite a while back, probably over 10 years ago. I was in the later years of high school and was home alone. My parents were at a wedding that required them to stay at a hotel, and my brother worked the night shift. At that time, my family lived in a very well-known East Coast city in a blue-collar neighborhood that was starting to take a nosedive. As a teenager, I was a bit of a loner. I wasn't a nerd or anything. I was a big dude who had friends and went on dates, but I'm a natural introvert, so I cherished the rare alone time that I got. This weekend, I was looking forward to engaging in my normal empty house routine, play some PlayStation on the big screen TV, then order a late takeout dinner, pizza or Chinese, and pig out while watching some Dragon Ball Z. Then around 2 a.m, fall asleep on the couch with my old dog, Cecil. Cecil was a beagle who was also old as the hills and had been in our family for about 8 years. He was quiet and peaceful and spent his time begging for food and sleeping. Unlike most beagles, Cecil never howled or barked. He was more than content to rest his head on your lap and spend the night there. Anyway, back to the story. It's approximately 1 a.m. I had just finished the last slice of pizza and was dozing off on the couch when I hear a bang coming from the back alleyway. I didn't think much of it. Anyone who has lived in a city knows noises happen at all moments of the night. Cecil's head popped up off my lap and the hair on his back stood up. He was always a bit skittish, so I calmed him down and started dozing off again. Not more than 2 minutes later, I hear another bang, and Cecil did something I never saw him do before. He leapt off the couch and ran like the wind towards the door leading to the basement, barking and growling like a dog twice his size. The look on his face reminded me of a German Shepherd canine unit. I'd never seen him like that before, which got my adrenaline pumping. Through the dog's barking, I can now make out a persistent banging. There was a seldom used door in the basement that led to our back alley. It was old and rusted and was hard to open, even with a key, and it made a lot of noise. I suddenly realized that someone was trying to break into my house through my basement door. Quick little bit of context for anyone who hasn't lived in a bad neighborhood. If someone tries to get into your house and moves on after they realize the door is locked, they want your stuff. If someone is persistently trying to get into your house despite the door being locked, well, they want you. Knowing this, I rush upstairs to grab the heavy wood baseball bat that I keep under my bed for situations like this. Then I head down to my basement. I probably should have ran, but I was a macho teenager with a tough guy complex, and plus I had nowhere to go. While I'm heading downstairs to my basement, Cecil blows past me with the speed and aggression of a dog half his age. Suddenly, I hear a man's voice say, "Oh, f***," and the banging stopped. I didn't call the cops or anyone else, which was probably the dumbest thing I've ever done. I just sat up for the rest of the night with a bat in hand. My brother came home that morning, and I told him what had happened. We went to the basement door to take a look, and when we gave it a tug to open it, the whole door fell off. This psycho was one good shove away from getting into my house, but old Cecil scared him off. I'm pretty sure that lazy fat old dog saved my life. When I tell this story to people, they dismiss his actions as a dog doing what a dog's supposed to do. But when I tell you that Cecil never barked or moved that fast in his life, you can take that to the bank. It was almost like he knew the urgency, like he knew that door was gonna give. A few years back, we had to have him put down because he had no will to live anymore. Before that injection, I got a moment alone with him. I thanked him one last time for our friendship and for what he did that night. At this point, I was a grown man with a wife and kids. I'm convinced none of that would have happened without old Cecil. Thanks, pal. I miss you. I've always believed in the paranormal. I grew up watching Ghost Hunters and Canada's Most Haunted with my mother and siblings. Throughout my 28 years lived thus far, I've had a few experiences that I would call paranormal in nature. Mostly shadow figures and unexplained sounds or objects moving. Most of the time, I'm able to convince myself it's just my imagination. Environmental components contributed to a potential mental break. But there was this one experience that was too much for me to pass off as nothing. I was probably 25 at the time, and I was working as a veterinary technician in an old animal hospital. I'd been working there for a few years at that point, and had picked up some of the building's history from co-workers, doctors, and even community members that brought their pets there. A cement brick out front of the building had the date 1904 stamped into it. I know that for the first 30 or so years, the building was just a home. No one ever said anything interesting ever happened to the family, but they sold the house to another family in the 1930s. The new family had turned the front of the home into a butchery and had kept the back and upstairs for living quarters. It was a home/butchery until 1952, when another family bought it. They added an extension on the back, threw up a few more walls, and turned the downstairs into a veterinary hospital, but kept the upstairs functional as a living space. 3 bedrooms with an eat-in kitchen and full bathroom. Very cute little apartment. At the time that I worked there, the upstairs was still a functioning apartment, but no humans were living there. The current practice owner had turned that space into the most wonderful cat boarding facility. It was so bright, and the kennels were so large and multi-leveled for the cats. There was a full kitchen for meal preps, and a bathroom with washing machines and blankets. No going up and down stairs, everything on the same level. It was honestly my favourite part of the job. I always volunteered for Sunday boarding shift because I was there alone for hours, in the morning and evening. The various boarding cats kept me company. I'd been doing Sunday boarding for a few years at that point, and I had seen shadow people and heard things during the day and the night, but nothing ever put me on edge being there alone. That was until we had this experience. There was only one cat there that day, and he was my favourite. I would let him out of his kennel, and he would just follow me around as I cleaned and restocked stuff. That day I wanted to air out the space, but the biggest window to use for that had no screens, so I opened the window, and Toby, the cat, and I went into one of the kitty free time rooms, and I shut the door behind us. I slid down the wall and sat on the ground next to the door. Toby came over for some love before scratching a post and then sprawling out on the floor a bit away from me. I opened the book I'd brought with me and settled into a good read. Now, I must remind you, I was usually there alone. The hospital manager would come in on occasion to do payroll or make the schedule, but she always called me to come open the door because she would forget her keys, and we had a bell on the front door so we could hear people coming in from everywhere in the hospital. That day, I was for sure alone. A few minutes into the silence of reading, I heard one of the floorboards in the hallway creak. Toby heard it too, because he lifted his head and looked at the door. I remember saying something along the lines of, "It's okay, Tobes, just an old house." When the doorknob turned, I froze, staring at the knob. Nothing was happening, but someone had turned the knob and was still holding it. I looked for a shadow under the door and didn't see one. Still frozen, I felt something brush up against my right arm, and I let out a gasping yelp. I looked down and it was Toby, still trying to climb into my lap, even though I had just scared him. The knob was let go, and we sat in silence for I don't even know how long. Eventually, I remember forcing my body to relax. Toby was still in my lap, staring at the door, ears back and body tense, so I made myself relax to calm Toby down. A few moments later, Toby had climbed off of my lap and was laying next to me to my right, opposite the door, still looking over to it occasionally. I decided to start reading aloud to keep any other noises at bay, but after 10-ish minutes of me talking, the knob turned again, and the door was pushed open. The door was not pushed open that wide, but enough for me to see out into the brightly lit hallway. I immediately stood up and froze. Toby had scattered to the far corner of the room and was letting out a growl. There was no one in the hallway. No one there, yet the knob was still turned. My mind was racing in that moment, trying to think of the appropriate reaction, what to do, how to stop it. All of a sudden I blurted out, "You're not allowed in here. Get out," in a loud and surprisingly stern voice. The knob was let go, and in that moment, I stepped forward and pushed the door closed and held it there. I kept repeating in my head, "Get out, get out." Holding the knob still and the door closed, I called out to Toby to check in. I turned and looked around the room. I found him standing at my feet, hair on end. He was turned and staring to the back of the room at the corner he was just standing in. There was a half door on the back wall in the corner. It was for extra storage, full of litter boxes and various other cat-related stuff. It had been closed, but was now slowly swinging open. The door opened into the corner, so I couldn't see. Every fiber of my being was screaming, "Run, you idiot!" But I couldn't. Toby was staying there, and I wasn't going to leave him there alone with whatever this was. My feet, apparently being the bravest part of me, moved forward, and then I was running full tilt and collided with the half door, slamming it closed. "You're not allowed, and you're not welcome. Get out now," I bellowed. And then I just continued repeating aloud, "Get out." Not in a loud voice, but a very controlled and certain one. I turned to look at the main door to make sure there were no more attempts at entry. I found Toby at my feet again, also watching the main door. I sunk to the floor, back against the half door, and Toby climbed into my lap. It took us over an hour to leave that room, and even then, it was very reluctantly. Toby stuck right next to me as I cracked the door open, and we peeked into the hallway. To our left was the open window. I took a breath, walked out into the hall, right to the window, shut it and locked it. Toby stayed in the doorway, looking down the hall in the other direction towards the kitchen. Directly across from the hall, the free time room was the kennel room, where Toby was staying. The door was wide open, and Toby darted across the hall into the kennel room. He ran not up to his cage, but up to his carrier. He was asking not to be left there, and it hurt my heart. I was not going to do that. But how was I going to explain to my boss that A, the hospital is haunted, and B, Toby is scared so I'm taking him home? I walked up to Toby and gave him a head pat. "I'm not leaving you here, bud," I remember promising him. I began packing up his stuff, grabbed a few toys and his blanket, and I was pouring the food in his bowl back into the bag when Toby let out a hiss and a ferocious growl. I spun around to see Toby right behind me, all puffed up and glaring across the hall to the room we were just in. The door was now wide open, and the lights were off, which plunged the room into blackness. I turned back around to close the food bag and throw the food bowl into the other packed bag, when I heard loud, fast footsteps coming towards our room. Toby let out a fearsome cry and charged forward like a cougar, and then quickly retreated to me. I yelled, "Stop! Get out! Go away! Leave us! Get out now!" Toby all the while growling and saying his piece next to me. We did that for minutes, demanding the thing to leave us. Then the door across the hall slammed shut and started shaking. I grabbed Toby's food bag, grabbed Toby, and ran down the stairs and right out of the door. Toby had freaked out when I grabbed him and was holding on to me with his nails, but I hadn't noticed until we had gotten to my car and I was sitting in the back seat, detaching him from me. In the back of my car, Toby and I sat there, stunned, catching our breaths while I bled. I had to go back in to lock up. Thankfully, nothing happened. I set the alarm, locked the doors, and left. I didn't go back upstairs at all. I left the rest of Toby's stuff where it was, his cage uncleaned, lights on, laundry machine running. I waited until I was home to call my manager. She was not happy. Some would have put her into the furious category, but she couldn't do anything at the time about it. The next day, I brought Toby back, carried him in, purring in my arms. Thankfully, Toby's owners were back from their trip that day and came to pick him up. I told them everything that happened, the complete truth, mostly because the manager was being a right witch and pretty much forced me to on threat of firing. But surprising to me, and I'm sure to my manager too, his owners were very understanding and even thankful to me for not leaving him there. They saw how much Toby trusted and liked me, and they trusted that I did what I needed to for him. They're great people. Unsurprisingly, Toby did not like staying there from then on. They tried it again once more, and Toby was so stressed, so I took him home. Even to this day, Toby comes to stay with me whenever his owners leave town. He's a few years older now, but still such a character. The hospital manager finally got to fire me a few years later for not following a company policy which I believe to be dirty and just rude. So I happily left there and got a job in a new shiny hospital working in the emergency care unit. I still see shadows here when working nights, but they have all been of cats and dogs, not human shapes. To start out with a little background info, I was a 13-year-old girl and an early bloomer, if you know what I mean. And I'm pretty tall for my age, so I looked older than I really was. Normally at the bus stop, when it was nice out, I would go pick up my little brother from school, since I got out of school before he did, and it's about 20 houses down. I would always take my dog, Caesar, with me, because he loved the attention and a good walk. I wouldn't say we lived in a good area, but by no means is it horrible trash. Across the street from our bus stop is a blue house that had still been listed on the sex offender list if you looked up the address, but I wasn't ever really scared because nothing ever happened. The people that lived there consisted of 4 white men that were the definition of white trash. Their age ranges were 18 to 45, I think. There was also an old lady who was in her 60s or 70s. She always had her grandson over, but she didn't technically live there. She also drove the guys everywhere. One day I was waiting at the bus stop with Caesar, while 4 of them were outside, 2 of them playing basketball, and the oldest man sitting in a lawn chair, drinking a beer and smoking a cigar with one of the younger guys. I was on my phone and had my pocket knife in my back pocket because I'm very protective of myself. This older man sets his beer down and puts out his cigar. He walks across the street, over kind of close to me, and I discreetly backed up a little. I just thought he was waiting for the kid that visited the old lady every week. I think he's her grandson, but I don't really know. He comes closer to me and asks to pet my dog. At this point, my dog is starting to growl. I say sure because I was very awkward at this age and tried to get my dog to sit, and at this point, Caesar was full on barking at this guy and won't stop. After a couple of minutes, I say sorry, he won't calm down, maybe later. I was trying to be friendly. He looks at me for the first time actually, because he had only been looking behind me the whole time. He smiles, and it was so creepy that it sends chills down my spine when I think about it now. He says it's alright, maybe next time you're here. He winks, walks away, and keeps clenching his fists so hard his knuckles turn white. After he walks away, Caesar calms down a little and starts sniffing behind me. There are 2 trees behind me and another row of houses. He keeps pulling, so I figure he sees a squirrel, which he only growls at squirrels. He starts full-on barking at the tree. I walk him over to the actual bus stop, which is at the corner, and he finally calms down. A couple of minutes later, I hear footsteps behind me, and I turn around and see a guy run out from behind the 2 big trees, and I immediately recognize him as the 4th guy from the house. Sadly, on November 7th, 2017, Caesar passed away at the age of 5 due to a cancerous tumor that spread into his lungs. I don't know what would have happened if my dog wasn't there to save me. So, creepy old guy across the street from my bus stop, let's not meet again. My grandmother passed on October 25th, 2015, which was her birthday. The night before, my mum visited her in the hospital and gave her a stuffed kitty because Grandma adored cats. My grandma owned a cat every year of her life until she went to the hospital, so I think it healed her. Her nurses said she was stroking the kitty all night until she ultimately passed away in her sleep, peacefully. The next few weeks was the legal side of someone passing. Death certificates, wills, setting up the funeral, closing accounts, selling and giving away belongings. We hardly had a second to mourn her. Grandma's funeral was held on that Saturday afternoon, and we buried her with her stuffed kitty. It also happened to be Halloween. My family unanimously agreed that we shouldn't be doing our normal Halloween candy activities, for obvious reasons. We placed a bowl of candy outside around 5 PM with our porch lights off to not cause too much disturbance, and brought the empty bowl back inside around 10 PM. Around midnight, I couldn't sleep and decided to go downstairs and grab some water. As I walked down the stairs, I saw a black cat sitting on the bottom step. I froze where I was standing and looked to the living room to see my mum was still awake, watching TV. I called out, "Mum, did we get a cat?" My mum turned around, confused as hell because she and Dad did not like cats at all. She said, "No, absolutely not." We both approached the cat, and immediately, this little guy is all over us. He's adamant about being pet, and I've never seen a more loving cat in my life. We pet him for about 15 to 20 minutes and decided he was probably a neighbor's cat, so we opened the front door and he walked right out without hesitation. It was like he knew that we needed him for just a moment, and he left when his time was up. Weirdly, I don't remember Mum and I having much conversation about the cat immediately after it happening, but the next day we tried to figure out where it might have come from. He was nowhere to be found in the neighbors' yards, and we never saw him again. I like to think that my grandma came to us in the spirit of the cat to let us know that we did a good job laying her to rest, and she's at peace now. My mum's dog, Punky, R.I.P., was a very sweet, loving dog. She was an ESA dog, but trained to be a service dog for PTSD before she lost her leg. I had never seen her get aggressive with anyone. In the entire 12 years she lived, she never growled or nipped anyone, and she had no sense of smell, so she loved all animals and people. A real gentle giant among our little terriers at 60 pounds. What I'm getting at here is that her barking at something and being aggressive was so wildly uncharacteristic that I only saw it once. I, an 11-year-old female, was at home with my siblings, 2-year-old boy and 6-year-old girl. My then stepdad is at work, and my mum ran up to the gas station to grab a pack of cigarettes. It was only a mile or two away from us. For reference, we lived in a 2-bedroom trailer in the middle of the woods on a dead-end road at the time, and you had to really make an effort to get down our road, find our house, navigate down our rickety driveway, and find the door. I'm sitting at the computer, having a grand time watching YouTube videos, when all of a sudden, all of our dogs, 2 Boston Terriers and 1 Chihuahua, perk up, bark a few times, and start investigating down the hall. My siblings were napping at the bedroom at the end of the hall at the time, so I figure they just stirred and scared the dogs. But then, Punky sits up suddenly, stands up on the couch, and puffs her chest out. Her ears are perked up, her fur standing on end, her tail straight up, and then she barks, loudly. I mean, the barks boom through the living room and echoes around, and all of a sudden, she lunges off the couch and goes tearing down the hallway. I'm already on edge, because I don't think I've heard her bark, ever. She's a Basenji mix, so her bark is more of a baying sound. But this was a big, loud, alert bark. I stand up and go look down the hallway, ready to fight off what I'm assuming is a shadow monster in the hallway based on how the dogs are acting. But then I hear it. 3 knocks. We didn't get visitors because of how weird our house was location-wise, so my 11-year-old mind had no clue what to do here. The only people who showed up were family, and they didn't knock, so I slowly walked towards the door. The knock drew the attention of the dogs, and they came running back down the hallway, all except for Punky. And I felt better with our 3 yappy dogs in the room with me, even if they were all the size of New York City sewer rats. I opened the door just a bit, and standing on our porch is the sketchiest man I think I've ever seen. I can picture him perfectly. He was a really thin, taller man with dark hair and a sunken face, bags under his eyes, and his half-managed hair, sort of like he just gave a quick brush and then figured it was good enough. Everything about him seemed just a little too thin, a little too shallow, and his clothes were all off too. They were nice, but fake nice, you know? Like a clean, newer-looking t-shirt and new jeans, but he had what looked like a suit jacket on. All his clothes were dark too, despite the fact that it was summer in Texas, and the weather was definitely into the hundreds that day. He also had this plain, unlabeled bottle in his hand. It looked like the bottle had been covered up and taped over. I stare up at him in confusion, because I definitely don't know this man, and I ask what he wants. He smiles at me in this way that was way too fake, like this exaggerated and forced grin, and he spoke in the same voice retail workers do. "Hey there, kiddo, I'm just trying to sell this here carpet cleaner." And he shakes the bottle at me. "Mind if I come in and show you how good it works?" Alarms are going off in my head because he just seems so off. Looking back with an adult perspective, the fact that he didn't ask if my parents were home is unnerving because he probably knew they weren't, and that's why he was here in the first place. I should have told him to get off our property, that I'd have to go and get my mum. Anything except what I did say. But I didn't. Instead, I just shook my head and say, "No, we don't have carpets." "Well, it works on other things." And he took a big step towards the door and shook the bottle at me. I start to freak out and think to close the door, but the thing is, our front door doesn't even lock. It's a small town, hard to access home. We never needed a lock, so that's basically useless. I'm sure there's something very wrong about to happen, and I'm terrified as I think about what to do in the few seconds I think I have before it does happen, when all of a sudden, I hear it. Punky has crept up from the hallway, lowered towards the ground with her teeth bared, and snarling like she was feral. She had slobber dripping from her mouth, her ears were down, and she was ready to pounce. The guy hears it too, and as I look towards Punky, she tries to lunge past me, and I just barely catch her with my legs, as she tries her hardest to duck past me and attack this guy. He freaks out and runs off the porch without another word, booking it down the driveway as I let Punky out along with the rest of our dogs, and they start chasing him. Our small dogs chase him down the driveway and stop about halfway, barking and jumping about, but Punky stops just on the porch and watches him with her ears perked, just staring into the distance until he disappears. I swear I saw someone join up with him running when he got onto the road. The second he disappeared, Punky's entire body language changed, and she went back to being the sweet dog I knew. No barking or growling, just laying around, mouth and throat covered in slobber still. I realize my siblings are still down and call and run to check on them. And when I get to the bedroom, my siblings were sleeping soundly still, but the bedroom window was wide open, the curtains pushed all to one side, and the items on the dresser in front of the window all shoved around. Someone had tried to climb through the window, no doubt in my mind about it. From what I can gather, the bedroom window was visible from the couch where Punky was sleeping, so I think someone was trying to climb through the window before Punky went after them and scared them off, and the man at the door was meant to distract me. They definitely didn't expect Punky, a bigger dog, because most of the time she was with my mum inside while our small dogs were the ones that saw the public eye more often. I don't know what they intended to do, but after my mum got home, she took all of us to my aunt's house, and on our way there, we saw the men walking up someone else's driveway. Men, plural, because we watched a second one split off to wait by the road. So, to the two men, apparently going door to door to sell their unlabeled carpet cleaner, I'd really rather not meet again. Growing up, I had a few different pets. 3 dogs, a chameleon, a goldfish, and my tabby cat, who I'll call her Jay. Jay and I weren't always on good terms. She was already an adult when I was born, so she had to deal with me when I was an annoying kid, giving off way too much energy for her calm, older demeanor. Over time though, we became friends. Jay was with me through my teenage years, until she suddenly passed away one day. I remember finding her on the floor mid-meal and wrapping her up in a towel. Jay had been in my life since birth. She'd been the one animal constant that I had had my whole life. She lived a good life though. When she wasn't warming up at the heater behind the couch, she was roaming our 3 levels or exploring the neighborhood. She made it without any health problems to the ripe old age of 19, and for that, I have no regrets. With how she passed though, there was no goodbye. It was sudden and unexpected. I often thought of her, looking out the window at her grave below the trees. I wondered if her soul was living on somewhere. Then one day, a cat spirit visited. It was a day like any other day. I was off school for summer vacation in college, and my family members were off working, so it was a perfect day just to lay back on the couch and binge watch TV. As I flipped through the channels mid-commercial, I suddenly heard what sounded like a faint purring. Confused, I muted the TV. However, the purring continued. I turned my head and realized that the purring was coming from behind the couch, the same couch Jay had laid behind for the heater. At this moment, the purring grew louder. It seemed to move from behind the couch to right in front of me, and then right in my ear. It was like a cat getting on the couch to nuzzle me. I felt a warm sensation take me over and a very relaxing energy, and then, gone. It was over within 15 seconds. I don't know for sure that it was Jay, but I certainly can't help but wonder. She was the only cat we ever had at that house, and the purring came from her favorite spot. I hope that it was her, and that she was coming to give me that missed chance at goodbye. It's been a decade since her passing. Wherever she is now, I feel that she's happy. This experience is the reason why I'm deathly afraid of intruders breaking into my home. So I was 10 years old at the time, and it was summer break after finishing 5th grade, maybe the 2nd or 3rd week of June. I don't remember why, but my mum had to go to dinner with some of her co-workers from the daycare she worked at one night. She left my older sister, who was only 12, to watch over me, but my older sister was more so there to make sure that the house didn't burn down rather than watch over me. So that night, my mum left for dinner, and she said she would be right back. I remember I was in the living room, and my older sister was upstairs in her room. I was also downstairs with Fenrir, who was a black Newfoundland that I grew up with my entire life. Unfortunately, by the time I was 10, he was showing his age. He couldn't walk, run, or stand up like he used to. We would usually have to help him get up and walk him outside to the backyard, which had a porch. The porch had a walkway we had built so that Fenrir could walk down easier. We would also have to bring his food and water bowls over to him, as he was always too tired to get up. So I'm watching TV in the living room with Fenrir, lying down by the side of the couch. Suddenly, I hear this growling. I muted the TV, turned around, and saw Fenrir growling and snarling at something. He then started barking at something. I looked over and saw that he was directing his attention at the back door that led to the backyard, but I didn't see anything as it was pitch black outside. Suddenly, Fenrir stood up with seemingly little to no effort and was violently growling, snarling and barking. Keep in mind, he hasn't been able to get up by himself in a while, so just seeing him stand up like he was young again scared the hell out of me. I used to say it was like as if Fenrir got possessed, and he was still directing his attention to the back door. Before I could react, Fenrir suddenly jogged over to the back door and got up on his hind legs and started scratching on the glass that was in the door, still growling and barking. At first, I thought that a squirrel probably got up to the porch and came up to the door, but then I remembered that Fenrir wasn't even this aggressive towards squirrels. When he would see one when he was younger, he would bark and chase it, yes, but it was more to scare the squirrel off rather than to actually hurt it. And to add to that, Fenrir was not an aggressive dog. He was always sweet to people and other pets. He was also usually calm, so to see him going feral like this actually scared me. He sounded like he wanted to kill something. I finally walked over to the back door that Fenrir was clawing at. I sort of pushed him away, surprised that he didn't snap at me, and I decided to put my face up against the glass to peek out and see if anything was there, but I didn't see anything. All the while, Fenrir is still scratching, growling, barking, and now baring his teeth and drooling to my right. I then walked to the right, where there was a light switch that turned on the porch lights, and Fenrir went back into his spot, scratching and growling at whatever he was upset about. I then flipped on the light switch. The second I did that, I saw a man dressed all in black, classic burglar outfit with gloves, a ski mask and everything. At first, he was seemingly looking into the door, with his face and hands pressed up against it, and when I turned on the lights, he got startled and took a few steps back. He then turned towards me. and it was like time was frozen. We were both just frozen, staring at each other for a few seconds, and me, being only 10, and not really knowing what to do, I quickly reached out to the knob of one of the back doors, more specifically the door that Fenrir was scratching at, and swung the door open. The guy tried to run, but Fenrir was right on top of him. The guy wasn't even able to get off the porch before Fenrir latched onto him. When I say latched on, I mean latched on. Fenrir had first bitten down on the guy's leg, and then moved, and he was biting down on the guy's arm. The guy tried to hit Fenrir off of him, but he was not able to, and I was just frozen, staring down at Fenrir, really biting down on him. To be honest, I was more scared of my own dog than the guy that was most likely going to break in, since I've never seen him this aggressive in my entire life. I actually thought that Fenrir was just going to straight up kill the guy. Eventually, the guy screams in agony, which I guess caused my sister to run downstairs to see what was going on. Not really sure why she didn't come downstairs when Fenrir was growling and barking for the first time, but I digress. My older sister was freaking out and eventually called 911. She then told me to go to the bedroom, which was also upstairs, and so I did. I ran to my bedroom and just stayed there, in shock of what I had just seen, and the whole situation in general. A while later, the police showed up, and also my mum eventually showed up. She burst through my bedroom and basically gave me the tightest bear hug I'd ever gotten from her. I remember that she was also crying, worried sick that I was hurt. While I was shaken up, I wasn't physically hurt. At one point, I finally go downstairs to see my older sister talking to a police officer, while Fenrir was lying down next to her with some blood on his face, much like Cujo. I remember thinking, oh my god, Fenrir just killed somebody. And then I also remembered that when I put my face up against the glass on one of the back doors to see what Fenrir was so pissed off at, I most likely put my face directly where the guy still had his face up against on the other side. So I made indirect eye contact with this guy before I turned on the lights without even knowing it. However, while the guy lost a lot of blood, he didn't die. And to be honest, I don't really know what happened to the guy afterwards, other than he had to have gotten arrested. My mum was instantly looking into buying a new house and moving, and we all eventually moved when I was maybe 11 or 12. Unfortunately, before that, first, I had developed my intense fear of dealing with intruders, so much so that I couldn't look outside windows when it was pitch black outside for a while, because I was afraid I was just going to see a face right there. And second, a few months before we moved, we had to put Fenrir down because he was just too old now. Needless to say that 2014 was the year that my childhood and innocence died. I'm 18 years old, and I have since been able to look outside windows when it's dark outside now. While I'm still afraid of intruders, it's not really as bad as it used to be. When I move out, I'm definitely getting a big dog of my own. I'll forever be thankful for you, Fenrir. Had it not been for you, who knows what that guy could have done to either me or my older sister. I have a 5-month-old kitty. He's your average playful little boy. He's had no behavioral problems until now, other than the occasional grump he has. Recently, my partner and I moved into a new house, and in the past couple of weeks, we've noticed his behavior has changed. He seems much more aggressive, always attacking things, and he's also started hissing at us sometimes, which is really unlike him, as other than when he's playing, he's loving and cuddly. We've made sure it's nothing health related, and it isn't due to the move, as we've been here a little while now, and other than curiosity, he hasn't really been affected by it. Anyway, As well as the behavior change, he keeps getting scared of things, especially in our bedroom. He sleeps in here too. This isn't a normal type of scared, like a cat jumping at a cucumber. He gets terrified and hides, refusing to come out. I'll give the most recent example. This morning, I was watching TV in my room, and I see him lying near the wardrobe. He looks up into the mirror and sees something. The wardrobe only faces a wall and the very edge of my bed. There was nothing in view that would have moved, or anything to startle him. After he saw whatever it is, he started making a clicking noise, like he does when he's watching something intently, usually flies, before he tries to catch them, and his fur sticks on end and his back arches. But instead of pouncing like he usually would, his eyes went wide, and he started backing away silently, and proceeded to run and hide behind a box under my bed. I couldn't find and hadn't seen anything that could have scared him. He's done this several times, but in different areas of the room, and sometimes in the next room. I know that my partner's father has seen something in this house before, which he swears blind was real. I 100% believe him. I don't know whether to be worried about what my kitten can sense in the house, but I know there's no other explanation for this change and quite freaky behavior. The only thing my partner and I have ever noticed about this house is that strange noises are not uncommon, that we usually just brush them off as nothing. I'm not sure. What do you guys think? My family moved to this house about 3 or 4 years ago. The first time I was there, after coming back from school, I kept hearing these meows. I only ever hear these meows when I'm at my parents' house. I remember the first time I heard it. It was really high-pitched and did not sound like my cat's. It's almost like a piercing meow, echoing. It's hard to explain, but it just didn't sound right. I was upstairs in my bedroom, and I went downstairs where my mum was sitting on the couch with our 2 cats. I asked her if she heard that sound. She looked confused. She hadn't heard anything. Then I asked if the cats had been meowing. My mum said no, and they weren't. They were cuddled up and asleep on the couch. Sometimes the meows sounded like they were in the same room as me, and sometimes it sounded like it was coming from upstairs or somewhere else. Sometimes it sounded so near and loud, it freaked me out. Sometimes my cats react, sometimes they don't. I often hear the meows coming from upstairs, and my cats do like to stand at, stare at, and paw at the door to the attic. All of this cemented to me that there was a ghost cat in the house. One night, I left my door cracked for the cats to go into bed. I closed my eyes and lay there, and then I feel a cat hop on my bed. You know that feeling where you can feel their weight walking and then settle at the end of the bed. My cat's like a spot by the window. I didn't think of it at the time, but my door was only cracked slightly so that my cats could push it open and get through. I didn't hear it squeak open, nor was it opened any wider than when I closed it. Anyway, with my eyes half closed, I reached down to where I felt the movement to give my cat a pet and a scratch, except my hand lands on nothing. I opened my eyes fully then, and look at the end of my bed, feeling around. Nothing. No one. I was so beyond confused. I had felt a cat there. I really had. So I lay back down and tried to go to sleep. Except, I feel movement again. My heart totally jumped, and I shot straight up and grabbed my glasses from my bedside table. I turned on my lamp, and there's nobody there. I went downstairs, and the cats were all down there. Anyway, after that, still freaked out, I spoke out into the world, hoping the cat spirit would understand. I don't like when you do that. You are welcome to hang around here, but it makes me uncomfortable when you do that." It didn't happen again after that, but I still often hear those strange echoing meows. I've been beginning to see flashbacks of a black cat around my ankles. I only ever experienced this too at my parents' house. I don't know if it's my eyes playing tricks on me, but sometimes, I swear, I look down and see this random black cat near my feet, usually walking. Then as soon as I notice the apparition, it's gone. Okay, before I get into the story, there's a few things I need to explain about my country, South Africa, for you to fully understand the story. In South Africa, it's normal to have high brick walls with electric gates, electric fences, alarms, etc. The crime here is hectic. It's also pretty normal to have big gardens. My family and I are big animal lovers, so at the time, we had 6 dogs, 2 Shar-Peis, 2 German short-haired pointers, and 2 dachshunds. With that being said, our dogs roam freely in and out of our garden, as it's obviously enclosed. We usually leave the veranda door open during the day for them to do their thing. Another thing about South Africa, it's normal to have a live-in domestic worker, or maid, and gardener. Like the average family usually employs them. It's not only for wealthy people, which seems to be a thing in other countries. For the story, our domestic worker is Ellie, and our gardener is Vince. So this happened in 2007 when I was 9 years old. My 10-year-old brother and I had just gotten our first cell phones that day. My dad surprised us after work. You may think it's a bit young, but it was used for emergencies to communicate with our parents. Anyway, it's an important piece of info for the story. We don't usually leave our veranda door open at night due to security reasons, but I remember it being a hot summer night that night, so of course, this night of all nights, the veranda door was wide open and the dogs were doing their thing in the garden. My brother and I were in my parents' room setting up our new cell phones, all excited. Ellie's daughter, Anne, who's like an older sister to us, who was 18, was helping my brother and me. My dad was somewhere in the house, and my mum was in the bath. I specifically remember Anne commenting about how the dogs were not shut up, and how annoying it was. That's when I noticed it too. Sure, they'd bark, but it was usually the dachshunds that yapped when the bigger dogs just chilled. Plus, it would only happen for a few minutes, then they'd get over it. Something was different that night, as even the bigger dogs were barking non-stop. My dad appeared in his room and mentioned to us that he too noticed the dog's incessant barking, and he was going to check if everything was okay. No alarm bells went off in my head, and I don't believe my dad thought anything was amiss either, because my brother asked to investigate with him, and my dad agreed. I was obviously too engrossed in my new Sony Ericsson. My dad ventured out to our garden with my brother in tow, when my dad had noticed the dogs were all grouped, growling and going nuts at a dark corner behind our in-the-ground swimming pool. The best way I can describe it is our garden beyond the pool hits like a slight decline, so we have a few steps leading down the hill to the bottom end of our garden. We usually have a lamp that lights it up, but my dad had noticed how that lamp seemed to be off, which confused him because he could have sworn it worked the other night. Either way, my dad said he got a gut-wrenching feeling because of this, and because of how out of character the dogs were acting. He called after them, and they'd usually come running, but tonight they all seemed to just look at him, then turn back around and continue going crazy at this dark corner down the steps. My dad told my brother to go back inside the house and get a torch, sort of using it as an excuse for my brother not to come with him because of this off feeling. When my brother went back inside, my dad slowly approached the steps. He noticed how the dogs seemed to be snapping at whatever it was, hiding just out of view in the darkness. As he got to the steps, he noticed the lamp was smashed. Confused, he inched to the steps, and as he put two and two together, it was too late. My dad, being an ex-vet, an avid hunter, felt something cold against his temple and immediately knew it was a gun. Out of the darkness stepped 4 other men in balaclavas, all armed. Shocked, he stood frozen on the steps. The man holding the gun to his head was instantly aggressive and asked him where my brother was, that he saw my dad come out with my brother, but my brother went back into the house. Why? My dad said something came over him, and before he knew what he was saying, he responded with, "He's gone inside to press the panic button." As he said that, he saw how all these guys started to panic. They started speaking in an African language called Zulu, assuming my dad couldn't understand. It's not common for white people to speak it. My dad had actually grown up on a farm, where he learnt it fluently because of the farm workers. The aggressive guy, holding the gun, said in Zulu, "Crap, the cops will be here any minute. Let's just kill this guy, grab whatever we can, and go." The others seemed apprehensive, and the smaller guy seemed really on edge, and continued to say how he can't go back to jail again, and they needed to get the hell out before the cops show, which would be any minute. He was panicking. My dad then fed on these guys' fear. He interrupted them, speaking English, pretending to not understand what they're saying, and said we usually have armed response vehicles that drove in our area since my brother pushed the panic button a long time ago. They'll probably be here any second. And that did it. My dad watched as their plan unraveled before them. The smaller scared guy started freaking out all over the other guys, saying that they needed to leave ASAP, or else they'd be caught. He seemed to make the others more nervous and lose confidence until they started full-on bickering amongst themselves, their plan slowly turning to crap, as a third guy had put it. The aggressive one pointing the gun to my dad's head slowly lowered it, and they started fighting, losing focus on my dad and shifting his focus onto his crew. My dad then used this as an opportunity to slowly back up the steps and turn to dart to the house. As luck would have it, as my dad ran into the veranda door, my oblivious brother was heading out with the torch. My dad scooped him up in his arm, mid-run, and sprinted into the house, not even closing the door behind him. Silly, I know, but I think he just wanted to get my brother inside as quick as possible, without even thinking. Anne and I were oblivious to everything. When my dad rushed through the bedroom door, slammed it shut, and told us to go upstairs into the attic. Quote, "There's 5 guys outside with guns. They're here to hurt us. Get upstairs now." My heart sank. I remember my body automatically responding and me sprinting to the stairs with Anne right behind me. My mum ran out of the bathroom in a towel, not too far behind. We sat there in the darkness in silence. I swear you could hear a pin drop. I think we were all just waiting to hear something below us in the rooms. My mum cursed, saying she didn't have a phone, neither did my dad. But in my hand was my brand new Sony Ericsson. No better emergency to use it than now, right? My mum dials the police, and I kid you not, they asked where we lived, we explained, and they told us it wasn't in their jurisdiction. Sorry, click. The line goes dead. We're now not only crapping ourselves, but we're flabbergasted too. My mum starts cursing like a sailor again, and that's when my dad realizes, damn, he didn't close the veranda door. And what about Ellie and Vince, who were in their rooms, blissfully unaware of the danger they're in? He gets his firearm in the safe in the attic, and he tells us that whatever we hear, to not come downstairs, to stay hidden no matter what. Now I'm sobbing, begging my dad not to leave us, but he tells us that he has to go to get Ellie and Vince before something bad happens to them. Now there's even more tears, as reality hits that there's 2 other people still in danger. Anne's understandably in hysterics because she's also fearing for her mum downstairs. My dad disappears, and the air is thick with tension. We can still hear the dogs going crazy, indicating that those men were still on our property. My mum then calls another number, the armed security that drives around the area, and they say they'll be over in about 10 to 15 minutes. They say to wait and stay hidden until they ring our bell at the gate. We all wait in silence, fearing that we'll hear a gunshot or anything indicating these men are still in our house. But there was just silence. The only sound was the dogs barking outside. After what seemed like hours, most probably a couple of minutes, we heard stomping coming up the stairs and my heart rate quickened. I remember shutting my eyes and praying that it was my dad with Ellie and Vince. Luckily, it was. We all hid for a while. No one dared to speak. The dogs seemed to have calmed down considerably, but were still barking every now and then. The gate intercom rang, and my dad told us to wait while he checked if it was the security company. And sure enough, it was. He opened up, and the nightmare was over. I remember standing up, and my knees buckling from the adrenaline my body endured. The armed security somehow notified the right police, and everyone investigated the garden. They found that there were actually 7 pairs of footprints, and that these guys bent the spikes on our wall and just climbed over. We got an electric fence shortly after, so there must have been 2 other guys hiding in the shadows that my dad hadn't seen, which is actually creepy in its own right. South Africa's violent crime is quite bad, and it's sickeningly common for torture to happen during home invasions. I was obviously so young at the time, I didn't know the horrors of the world, and was just scared for my family getting hurt. Now that I'm older, just the thought of 4 women being in the house, and my mum being in nothing but a bath towel, gives me the chills to this day. The cop said the fact that there were so many guys, instead of like 1 to 3, indicates that these guys possibly had sinister intentions. Thank goodness nothing happened to my family, and I'm forever thankful for my dad's quick thinking regarding the panic button. Also, I'm so glad my dad understands Zulu and can manipulate the situation to benefit us. Lastly, my family will forever be in debt to our good boys and girls that warned us that night. A terrifying and life-changing outcome would have 100% happened that night had it not been for our incredible doggos. From that day onwards, my dad always gave them leftover rice or meat with their dinner. Rest in peace, Impy, Shutu, Dash, Fudge, Wrinkles, and Pikachu. I'm sure there was a special place in heaven reserved for you angels.